I think everyone will agree that Brian Shaw was a friend to us all. And I'm so glad to see everyone here for the Brian Shaw celebration of life, or the life of Brian. I'm just going to share a couple of songs that I thought about when I thought about my buddy Brian. If you're down and troubled and you need some love and care, and nothing is going right, close your eyes and think of me, and soon I will be there to brighten up even your darkest night. You just call out my name. You can sing it with me if you want to. And you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you gotta do is call, and I will be there. Yes, I will. You've got a friend. Now if the sky above you should grow dark and full of clouds, and that old north wind should begin to blow, keep your head together, call my name out loud, and soon you'll hear me knocking at your door. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running, see you again. This winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you gotta do is call, and I will be there. Yes, I will. Hey, ain't it good to know that you got a friend when people can be so cold? They will hurt you, they'll desert you, they'll take your soul if you let them. Oh, but don't you let them. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running just to see you again. Talking about winter, spring, summer, fall, all you gotta do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. You've got a friend. Friend. Ain't it good to know you got a friend? You've got a friend. Horses are creatures who worship the earth as they gallop on feet of ivory, constrained by the wonders of dying and birth. The horses still run, they are free. My body is merely the shell of my soul, but the flesh must be given its due. Like a pony that carries its rider ride her back home. Like an old friend that's tried and been true. I had a vision of eagles and horses high on a ridge in a race with the wind. Going higher and higher, faster and faster, on eagles and horses, I'm flying again. Eagles inhabit the heavenly heights. They know neither limit nor bound. They're the guardian angels of darkness and light. They see all and hear every sound. My spirit will never be broken or caught. The soul is a free-flying thing, like an eagle that needs neither comfort nor thought, to rise up on glorious wings. I had a vision of eagles and horses high on a ridge in a race with the wind, going higher and higher, faster and faster, on eagles and horses, I'm flying again. My body is merely the shell of my soul, but the flesh must be given its due. Like a pony that carries its master back home, like an old friend that's tried and been true. My spirit will never be broken or caught, for the soul is a free-flying thing, like an eagle that needs neither comfort nor thought, to rise up on glorious wings. I had a vision of eagles and horses high on a ridge in a race with the wind, going higher and higher, faster and faster, on eagles and horses, I'm flying again. Flying again, flying again.
Thank you, Jim. For those of you who do not know Jim, he was our director of music here for many, many years. And then Nashville discovered him, and we weren't able to hold on to him any longer, but it's wonderful to have you here. I'm Joan Tufts. I'm a chaplain, prayer chaplain here at Unity. I've been here for almost 20 years, not nearly as long as Brian was. I want to welcome you, as Jim did, family, friends, old-timers from Unity. We're so glad you're here to share with us our celebration of such a beautiful, beautiful soul. Let's begin with prayer. Father, Mother God, creator of all that is, we come together, friends, loved ones, to celebrate the life of Brian, to express the gratitude that we have for his sweet, sweet nature. We're so appreciative of the example he was of being present. Brian was able to show us how to be present through the good and through that which many of us would label not so good. Brian developed the ability and made the commitment to stay present. And we are so much the benefactors of that gift. We're so grateful for all that he's been to this community, to his family, and to everyone who had the privilege of being a part of his life. And we lift him up now, knowing, as Jim just sang to us, his soul is never ending. It's merely his body has taken him home. So we thank you, God, again, for this beautiful, gentle, strong, and kind soul. We pray this prayer in the name of the Christ presence in all of us. Amen. And now I'll introduce Kay, Chanel. Oh, Carol. Okay. Carol, his sister.
Okay, let's see if I can get through this. Okay, we are here today to celebrate and remember the life of Brian. I'm going to tell you a little of his life before y'all met him. Brian was a very loving and patient person and never wanted pity from anyone. He had suffered a broken leg as an infant when his babysitter fell on him. When he was around 4, had his arm broken, and we thought he was going to lose it. Nearly drowned one summer. That was the first time. Yeah. I remember one time he had the whole neighborhood looking for him. One day when he decided to take an afternoon nap in the neighbor's doghouse. I remember this because I was out looking for him too. And Brian, and that was just how he was. He just was up for anything. And at this time, Brian also lost one of his brothers. And he had all this by age 5. Maybe that's why he became the man he became. Brian left Canada around age 7 with his family and moved to Florida. Brian took to Florida life right off. Off went the shoes and off went the shirt. He spent his days in the woods with his newfound friends, bringing home critters of all kinds. He would often go fishing with his dad on the weekends over at the beach. In 1964, Brian moved to Birmingham with his family. This is where our mother, Mary, passed away in 1968 of cancer. This was a time in our lives we looked to each other for advice and support, not always to the best advice and with the best results, but we survived. I remember one night getting a phone call from the Homewood Police Department to come and get Brian. Apparently they were playing a game called Pull the Purse. Maybe you older folks might remember this. I don't know, I didn't. That's what Brian said. He said you took a purse, tied a rope, and set it in the middle of the road for a car to stop. And then when they stopped, you pulled the rope and ran. Well, too bad it was a police officer that stopped. He came home and he was good for a while. He never did anything bad, he was just mischievous. He always found something to get into. He was always ready to try something new and different. And as he grew older, he was always up for another new adventure, as you all know that. In 1973, his dad suffered a stroke, and Brian became the caregiver for him for over 6 years. We all know Brian's life after that. He married Abby and had a son, Artie, and lost both of them to cancer. He also lost his last brother, David, during this time. Brian and I talked about what had happened, and he decided to go on a long road trip. When he came back, he had changed some. He went back to Canada a lot more to visit his father's only surviving sister, Ruth. He ended up remodeling her whole kitchen. I think that was when he found out he could go and just visit friends for free by just lending a helping hand on a project that they had. He often talked about the places he stayed and his newfound friends. When he decided to settle down again, things started to look up. He met a new lady, Mary Grace. Through Mary Grace, Brian met a whole new bunch of friends and had a whole new bunch of adventures, which he'd have probably never done if he hadn't met Mary, because she was always on the go like him, wanted to go someplace or do something. Then Brian got the news again, someone you love is being taken away from you too soon. Brian needed a change after this, so he moved to a place called Odenville, Alabama. Never heard of the place. The first time I came to visit, I thought, what was my brother getting into? Now, though he loved it here and carved out a whole new life for himself in what he called the playpen. That was his little house and his little tool shed he played in. Brian also developed a passion for restoring old cars. He would tell me about a truck or a car he fixed up, and when he drove it, someone would offer to buy it, and he would sell it and go to the next one. Brian called me one night, very excited, and said he was going to volunteer for the Red Cross. I said, okay. He talked about the different courses he had to take, and he was very excited, but I don't think he knew what he was getting into. I really don't. He loved working for the Red Cross, helping people in their time of need, no matter what time of day or night Deborah Looney would call him. He was always ready to go. I could go on and on about Brian and the things he had and the people he met and the places he went. Through all the grief that had been thrown at Brian, he still had a zest for life. Brian had a saying, bark less and wag more. He was always there for his friends and family. All they would have to do is call out his name, Brian, and he would come and help. Thank you.
Everybody, it feels really great to be here at Unity. I hadn't been here in a while. Oh, my, yeah, got it. Sorry, Barry. Can we redo this?
I know you told me, but you're running down the stairs now. No.
Sorry about that.
Thank you, Carol. That was precious. And just on the Canada thing, golly, he loved his Canadian citizenship so much. He was a dual citizen, and that happened when he and Mary were married, and she got him a picture of the Queen, had it framed, and it still hangs on the wall at his playpen. Thank you, Unity, for giving us the perfect place to honor Brian. He loved it here. We came here so many times. And Jim, thank you. He would love what's going on here today. We know he's here. What we want to do today with all the heartache and heartbreak and sadness of Brian's passing, we really want to talk about the last 5 years, because he had a rough row. I learned a lot today what a stinker he was. Typical little boy. Yep, I get it. But we want to focus on the last 4 or 5 years, 6 years, because one thing I know for sure, he was happy. He was having the time of his life. He was meeting new people, having adventures, volunteering for the Red Cross. He was a happy man. I'll tell you, on his birthday this year, he wrote, I never thought on my 67th birthday I would be doing this, referring not only to the Red Cross, but the life he was living. I met Brian in 1988, a long time ago, 33 years, who knew, by what could be called happenstance. Over the years, I've come to know that it was more the beautiful symmetry of life, or as us Unitics call it, divine order. In those 30-plus years, it's been an honor and a joy to call Brian my friend and brother. We've long called each other bro and sis, and I did always want a brother, so I think I got blessed with the best brother that anyone could have. He was a member of our family, close to my boys and David, and my friends became his friends. He was with us for holidays, birthdays, Auburn football. He was an Auburn fan, yeah, even horse races. So any event we had, we'd call Brian and see if he was in town. So, you know, the thing that we have to wonder is, how did he do it? How did he come back after tragedy, after tragedy, after tragedy? Cancer did a number on Brian and his life and his loved ones. How did he learn to accept and move on? He was simply an extraordinary spirit. Brian told me many times, I'm a simple man. I was never buying it. He was in the sense of not needing a lot, not needing fancy or fabulous things. Well, except for Babe, that's pretty fabulous. Brian found happiness in the smaller things of life. He lived in the present. He didn't try to impress. He spoke his truth. He was grateful for his life, his family, and friends. Some words that Mary spoke in a document I have. She said, he deeply drinks in all of life, wiser and stronger and grateful for its beauty, its beautiful mystery, instead of diminished by all that he has endured. Mary had such a way with words, and I think that was just a perfect description of Brian. You may also know, or not, that Brian considered himself in some ways Buddhist. If you followed him on Facebook, you know a lot of what I'm going to tell you today. But after it happened, one of my dear cousins said to me, she knew Brian, loved Brian, said, well, how did he get to become a Buddhist? And I said, well, you know, I don't really know, but I do know that when Mary was so sick and not a good prognosis, I started to see books and sayings and Buddhas, that's one of his over there, around the house. So I thought, well, I don't really know how to answer that question, but I want to know the answer too. So I contacted a mutual friend of mine and Brian's, Jeff Goen. Jeff lives we knew him professionally, and then we got to be great friends with him. Jeff lives in Silver City, New Mexico, and if you read his Facebook page, you know that he saw Jeff every time, and Jeff's just a wonderful human being and a practicing Buddhist. So I said, Jeff, help me with this. So he wrote to me an email. And I may butcher this word, but anyway. The term Bodhisattva is often translated as a friend of the world. Brian Shaw was definitely that. Whether it was making emergency repairs or caring for and working for the Red Cross to arrange accommodations for those who are displaced by fire, being a rock of stability for someone going through a rough patch in his life, Brian was generally a selfless friend of the world. And I thought that hit just right. And Jeff goes on to say that I don't even know if Brian would really refer to himself as a Buddhist. I'm not sure he regarded himself as a Buddhist per se. Those of us who were close to Brian know that he wasn't one to conform to pre-existing paths or doctrines or models, right? But anyway, Jeff said, nevertheless, upon hearing of Brian's passing, a mutual friend of Brian's, that's Jeff, said this. I've been a practicing Buddhist for 22 years. Every day I apply great effort to study and meditate on loving kindness, compassion, and acceptance, which are the cornerstones of Buddhist practice. Although Brian might not have formally entered the Buddhist path, he did something even more meaningful. He lived kindness and compassion and acceptance. It seemed to come to him so naturally and effortlessly in this way, and so many other respects. He was a role model for me. Sound about right? Yeah, yeah. So, I want to talk about Brian and what made him happy, what brought that joy to him. And there were many things, all of you, me, family, friends, but some things very specifically that brought him a lot of joy the last 5 years. The road. He surely found joy and healing on his travels. He traveled after Artie and after Mary. The sights, the sounds, the food. He was awed by the magnificence of the country. He was amused, if you followed Facebook, and he was delighted by what he saw, those he met, many, many friends along the way. On 10/10/15, and this was after Mary, words from Brian. I'm back home after 32 days on the road, the most healing trip I've been on for a long time. I did a journal every day, and here's the last day on the road. It's hard to stay home. Give me a call. I love the company of friends. At sundown, this is about the travel back. At sundown, I crossed the magnificent Mississippi River and crossed over to Greenville, Mississippi. I can see the same red sun now in my rearview mirror. I think it was coming from New Mexico home. This is the point I would normally stop and find a room for the night. I've traveled 750 miles in over 13 hours, but I feel good and I want to push on. The dark comes as I slice through the night. My window is down and the cooling evening breeze feels good. I don't know how to explain it, but every mile I drive, my brain becomes more aware and active. I do love driving late at night, especially because all the amateurs are off the road. That's Brian. I think a Bruce Springsteen song, Revved Up Like a Deuce, Another Runner in the Night. But this is a record for me. As I get out of Scout, the car at the time, I pat him on the hood and say, good boy. I'm so wound up, I do not go to bed until 2:30 after 4 glasses of wine. I wake the next morning at 7:45 and feel great and looking for my next adventure. So, real joy right there. Here's another one. This was in 16. I'm back in Birmingham. This is after a long travel. The party's over. I'm finished running for a while. According to Hippie Van's computer, I've been behind the wheel for 127 hours, driven 5,637 miles in 31 days. I look forward to seeing all my friends and sharing stories from the last month. To everyone I saw on the road, thank you for your hospitality and friendship. What you'll see about Brian and anything I talk about or others talk about is there's that friendship through there. We all meant so much to him, and just as he did to us. And again, 5.5 days, 1,726 miles and 43 hours behind the wheel, and my adventure is over. Some of the things he saw the second largest ball of twine on the face of the earth. Yeah, so we had, that was a big deal. He traveled, one of the trips, one thing he wanted on one of the trips to travel the Easy Rider's route. Who was it? Nicholson and Peter Fonda. Yeah, so he did that. That's Brian. He wanted to find Bonnie and Clyde's graves, and he did. And he went to, I guess for decades now, he went to the Catapaloosa Festival in D.C. And he got there early, and he set up, he built the stage, he did the lights, and then when it was over, he said it was a lot of fun, and I'm sure it was. He said, I started cleaning up and dismantling everything. Now it's time for an afternoon nap, then repack and hit the road. Gonna get up and do it again, my friend. And then he did a beautiful set of words about driving the hippie van to Tennessee today to see the total eclipse of the sun. So we're going to talk about cars in a minute, but there was one little thing. He said, my days of taking unimproved back roads are over for this trip. The next hippie van is going to be a four-wheel drive. With love to all my friends. So he did love traveling. Now there's that thing about state signs. He loves state signs. Again, Facebook will tell you all, and it will show you the pictures he made. Thank God he didn't get hurt, because see, I was the worry wart. I was always worried about him sleeping in the hippie van, just, being like a sister, right? But anyway, this is what Brian says about state signs, but I can tell you they brought him joy. In the fall of 2015, I started taking photos of myself next to the state welcome signs as I drove around the country. It's been an adventure I never thought I would complete, but today I have taken my 48th photo. Taking the actual photos has not been easy. Finding one can be hard, as not all roads have a sign. If there's a river between states, which most states have, the signs are on the bridges, and there is nowhere to set up a tripod or camera. But you know what? He figured it out. He says, I do not take them on interstates, as stopping on the road is dangerous and illegal. Because of my searching for the signs, I have seen much of the back country in the states I've been, and met some great people. Thank you to all my friends who followed me throughout this adventure. So Brian loved to travel. He loved state signs, and he loved his home. Carol mentioned it, and I had the same reaction when I got there. I'm going, wait a minute. But he loved it. He said, I closed on my new property this afternoon in Odenville. It's going to be called the Playpen. The last owners left a lot of food and furnishings, which I spent the afternoon drinking beer and checking out. Wish I was there with them. I had to break out in laughter, though, when I noticed the lava lamp on the nightstand and realizing that I was in a hippie van at the Playpen with my newfound lava lamp. I think life is coming full circle for me. Mi casa, su casa, friends. Is that Brian? So he loved his house. I will tell you, just so you know, that why he bought the house in that location was the 3-car working garage. Had the thing that comes up, had the lift. He was in there all the time. He loved it. And he loved the house, and he made it his. And he would let me decorate sometimes, because I was always on him about, let's do the thing, and we could do the curtains. And he's going, okay. Then he would give me some money and say, go do it. We come to cars. He loved cars. Did he always love cars, Carol?
Yes, Ford first.
Okay, and in high school, he loved cars. Well, I can say he found tremendous joy in his cars. Truly a car guy. He started his travels in Scout, which was a green Subaru, and Mary named her Scout. I remember very well the day they brought it to my house so we could go for a ride. Remember going for rides when you get a new car when you were young? and he talked about, he took her on his first long trip, and he talked about how filthy it was. And there's a picture on Facebook. The car didn't look green, it looked the color of dust. And he said he decided before he headed home that he needed to get it washed. And he said the guy at the place, the attendant let me go through free and said, "Damn, that's a dirty car." Everybody loved Brian. And then the hippie van. You know, he saw this van somewhere in Tennessee on his travels, and he had to have it because he needed a new travel van. He named it the hippie van. Here's an update on the hippie van. I got the fridge. It was just simple, empty van. Like one of those white, long vans, not like a travel trailer or anything like that. You see, I know a lot about cars, right? Here's an update on the hippie van. I got the fridge freezer wired and installed on a stand that holds 7 of my favorite soda, waters, or wines. I have half of the put a number on the page. Yeah, I have half the cabinets across the bed finished. The lower cabinet holds 6 gallons of water for my desert trips. My whole day is spent either working on it or trying to find hardware that will work. The biggest job left is all the wiring, then the headliner. I wish to all my friends that your days be cool and productive. And then a little later, as he was about to take the hippie van out for travels, he said, a special thanks for Beverly for making curtains, and an extra thanks to her husband David for letting me use his workshop at Wolf Pen for the last 2 months. There you go, Beverly and David. And Sally, thanks to you for putting up with my noise every morning starting about 5:30. It's all over. I leave for Tampa in the morning. Oh, and he sold his Scout at that time. And so there's lots of hippie van stories. But then in 8 of 16, he says, I'm slowly collecting my toys, being cars. I've been looking for a pickup truck all spring. I finally found one in Cleveland, Tennessee with only 56,000 miles and all the options. Drove it home to the playpen and it ran great. I haven't had a full-size truck since the 70s. I tried to think of a name for it because he always named his cars. Old Rex keeps coming to mind. Any suggestions? And then he got the Jeep. And I think it was brand new. It was a beautiful red Jeep, and he kept it for a while. And about that same time, he was in Florida, and he said, I thought I was finished with traveling for a while, but then I saw a cool convertible for sale on the Palm Coast of Florida and made a deal over the phone with the owner. It's a 93 Toyota Celica GT Limited, one owner, garage kept, 46,000 miles on the car. I flew to Jacksonville, Florida on Friday, where the owner picked me up at the airport, and I drove home. His toys, he loved his toys. Oh, and there's a little more about the Jeep. We went to the Good Times drag strip, and I ran my Jeep Cherokee. Brian ran, this is from someone else. Brian ran his 77 AMC Hornet. I've always been a drag racing enthusiast, but have never run a strip. So check that off my list. I took it easy on the car as it's new, but did 5 passes with cars going over 100 miles an hour. He loved his cars, and he loved adventure. It was perfect. And then there's this thing that says, I've been a good boy, so I bought myself a new toy. And you may have seen that new toy when you came in today, a 2002 Camaro 35th anniversary Z28 SS. Somebody else will have to say more about what that means. It has a Corvette, all aluminum, 5.7 V8, 335 horsepower from the factory. All original and immaculate condition with 16,000 miles. My new baby. Thus, babe. And then just a fun little Brian story. He said, now back to my story. It was a nice sunny day. He'd been on a long stretch with the Red Cross, and he said, now back to my story. It was a nice day, and I decided to stretch Babe's legs and take her to the grocery store about 8 miles down the highway. It's a mile to the main road from my house, which is enough time to let her warm up. I pulled up onto the highway and from a rolling start, put the pedal to the metal. Within about 4 seconds, I was pushed way back in my seat and she shifted into second gear around 60 miles per hour and the rear tires broke loose. The rear end started to come around on the left side, but I kept the throttle down and corrected with steering. By then, I was doing 75 miles per hour. And I took my foot off the gas because it's a 55 mile per hour speed limit. And I wouldn't want to break the law. He said, Babe is stock and 18 years old, but for me, for about 7 seconds, this 66-year-old's heart and adrenaline were pumping hard. I've had my thrill for the week. And then, of course, the trip to Talladega. He donated $50 for the tornado victims so he could run 2 laps on the speedway. He said, I was told to travel at highway speed, so I took her to 100. Too much fun. He loved traveling. He loved cars. He loved state signs. And he made adventures out of all of it. He found healing in all of it. But I'll tell you, he loved his friends. And they brought him joy. Just a few things Brian wrote. So all my dear friends, I've been back in Birmingham for a few weeks and want to tell you all, thank you for taking care of me. I know when I need a friend, I can lean on you, as the song says, and you will be there, Jim. Perfect song. I've been in the hands of so many great people since I got back. Year later, thank you for all my dear friends for the birthday wishes. It has been a good day as I finished the disaster relief for the Fultondale tornado about 1 p.m. I've been the lead of 5 Red Cross DA teams since Wednesday, and we've assessed the damage of every home we could find. Check your backyard, as a lot of them were no longer there. About 200 were destroyed and 2 times that amount damaged. This is the real part here. I love every day I get to live. I would never have thought that on my 67th birthday I would be doing this. Love to all my friends. And then you may, if you read Facebook, you remember that he bought, I think he sold his Jeep to somebody in Georgia. And I think he took it there, the guy came here, they met somewhere in between, and all went well, and the guy left happy with the car. But then he got a call from the guy, and he said, hey, Brian, did you leave anything in the car? And he said, well, I don't think so, unless it's money. And so the story with Brian is he didn't like to take credit cards on the road. So he'd get a big old wad of $100 bills and hide it. And sometimes he would forget where he hid it. He told me that, and I get that. But anyway, so the guy called him, the guy called him and said, "Hey, Brian, did you lose anything?" And in fact, he had the money. It was Thanksgiving Day, and he said about that conversation, we talked for about a half an hour about our lives and how honesty was instilled in us by our family, friends, and life experiences. I'm glad to get the money, but more thankful for talking with the man that found it. It reinforced the lesson I try to practice in my life: see all people in the world as good, unless they prove you they're not. Just very quickly, to all the friends I saw, and I can't wait to see you again. And Will, this was in 2020. You know how much I appreciate your fellowship and hospitality. To all the friends I've missed for 31 days, I'm going to be around for a while and want to see you. I've missed you. So if you're looking for an amigo to do something with, give me a call and I will do the same. Thank you to all my dear friends for their birthday wishes. I took your wise advice and had a happy birthday. Call me if you want some company, and I will do the same with you. I hope that every moment of your lives can be as joyful as possible. If you call me, I can tell you some fun stories. And there were a bunch of fun stories. Brian had a little funky sense of humor, as most of you know. And he told many stories like the laundromat. One of the stories was that he went to a lot of laundromats during the time he was out on the road, and he was used to them. But there was this one he went into. Find it. And sorry, people. Anyway, it said something like, beware, before you put your clothes in the dryer, beware of substances, and clean out the dryer before you put your clothes in. And he had to talk a lot about, he really wondered what substances were in his clothes. Yeah. He was an amazing man. And everything that's been said today just reinforces that. My life is enriched beyond words for knowing him and still knowing him, and I know he's still in my life. Another thing that brought Brian great joy, as you've seen from what I've read, was the Red Cross. And now I'd like to introduce his dear friend, and I guess you were his boss, right? Yeah. At the Red Cross. Deborah Looney, and then you'll introduce yours.
Thank you. And for those of you that don't know, Brian's affectionate name for me was the boss. It really was. And I think the team will agree to that. He would call me up and he'd say, "Boss, what you want me to do today? What's our mission today?" I'm very honored by the family for us to say a couple of words about dear Brian. Dear, sweet, wonderful Brian. He meant a lot to the Red Cross family. And at this time, I'd like for his Red Cross family to stand, if you would. There are several of us here. Would you stand? As a Red Cross family, you all know there are thousands of us all over this great country and around the world. And we have one mission. No matter what the role is within the organization, and Brian served many roles within the Red Cross, most important and most recently, and as Kay and as his sister Carol alluded to, was the fact that Brian, a lot of times when there was a big disaster like the Fultondale tornado, and there was the tornadoes that we had on March 25th in Shelby County, Brian extensively went up into Anniston and worked that Anniston area where we had the 3 fatalities that day. Also recently, we had the floods back on May the 6th. And then we also had some other disasters in between, multifamily home fires, etc. Whenever there was a big disaster like that, in my chapter, it's so funny, I asked Brian when I first started 2 years ago and you're going to hear David Goodwin talk in a few minutes. But I asked Brian to be my damage assessment leader for our damage assessment team. And so he thought about it, and he called me up. He says, Debbie, he says, I won't be the leader. He says, but I'll lead. He said, because you never know when I'm going to be on the road. And so I knew up front that he did want to take the leadership position, but if he was in town, I knew I could depend on Brian. In April of last year, we were struggling in our chapter. One of the roles that Brian fulfilled that was really, really important to our organization is he was a duty officer and he was a disaster action team supervisor. Brian's job from 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. the following week, from Monday to Monday, was to dispatch every call that came into our 10-county region to make sure that people and their families, when they were in their time of need, that they were taken care of, and he would dispatch to his team. In addition to that, he also was a jack of all trades in the Red Cross. Not only could he dispatch, but Brian also, on the week that he was off, he actually rotated with another duty officer, Leander Walker. He wanted to be here today, but he's so funny. When I asked him, Lee, are you going to come? He says, but Debbie, who's going to answer the phone while you're all at the... And I said, well, I think Brian would appreciate that. But anyways, he would alternate with Lee. And Lee was so funny. He would always say, he says, Brian challenges me, Debbie. He says, until Brian came on board, he said, I didn't know there were so many notes we needed to write on these cases. Because every detail, Brian took being a duty officer to another level. I never worried as a manager. I got to a point of where I would say to him, well, what do you think we ought to do? And he would say, and I'd say, okay, all right. He says, really, boss? I said, yeah, you go ahead. You run with it. Run with it. But he took his job and his compassion to help other people very seriously. In the Red Cross, we have 5 C's. Brian epitomized those 5 C's. The 5 C's are, Brian was a compassionate person. He worked to improve the lives of others that he served by treating everyone with care and respect. Brian was definitely collaborative. If you could have seen him on his last mission, gathering his team up, getting everybody, and some of these folks here, getting everybody up in the conference room, ready to go with all of their assignments, doing the maps, making sure that everybody knew what route to take in assessing the damages to the homes that he was going out to assess. And then one of the last things, and I didn't realize it would be the last time, but one of the things that I remember most is that as a manager, a lot of times I stayed back, and he's reporting in to me. Well, it came a point of where with the Fulton Dare tornadoes, there was so much damage that he wanted to show me. And I didn't know how honored I would be to have him take me on my own personal tour of the Fultondale area, where he was showing me all of the damage and the places where people needed help. Brian was creative. If there was a better way of doing something, he would call me up. Debbie, this process makes no sense. Well, what do you think we ought to do, Brian? And he would tell me. But he was very creative. If he could find a simpler way of doing things, he would call me up and he would say, I think we need to do X, or we need to change this procedure. He also was credible. He acted with integrity. One of the things that we champion at the Red Cross is that we're transparent guardians of the public trust and we honor our promises. I can't think of a single one that Brian ever broke with me as his manager. If I asked Brian to do something, Brian would do it. And if he couldn't do it, he was the type of person that he would let me know way in advance. One of the last emails that I received from Brian was that Tuesday morning. And Brian had already forewarned me. He had written me the note on his birthday. I got the same type of note. Debbie, I'm going to step back a little bit because as soon as I get my vaccine, and by the way, I'm going to Talladega County. If I can't get it in St. Clair, I'm going to Talladega County. And he did to get his vaccine. He said, I'm on the road again. And he said that he would be gone the whole month, around July the 12th through August the 12th, to New Mexico to house sit. And so that was one of the last things that we talked about was his going on the trip, because as soon as I got that text, I called him. I said, you mean you're going to be gone? He said, yeah, Deb. He said, but I'm going to be gone longer than that, so you better get somebody ready. So he was getting ready to go on the road again. And Brian was committed. One of the things is that we have to hold ourselves accountable for defining and meeting each other's objectives or clear objectives. delivering our mission, and then the most important thing, stewarding our donor funds. This is something I can tell you about Brian. The team knows when we have a big mission like that, the Red Cross, we're concerned about our volunteers especially being able to get meals where they're out in the field assessing the damages to homes and things. So I would give Brian a mission card. And so every single time I would give him that mission card, I'd come back the next day, he'd have a little note on it, didn't use. He never used a single mission card. I know I've issued him about 5 or 6 in the last 7 months, but he never did. He said, give it to somebody that needs it. And so he would never do that. So when I think about Brian, I thought about taking his name and telling you a little bit about what I know in working with Brian, not only as a friend, but Brian was a member of my family. And my husband can attest, no matter what time of night, because sometimes he answered those calls, he'd say, Debbie, wake up, it's Brian. No matter what time of night it was. But when I think about Brian's name, I think about this. Brian was ballsy, he was bold, and he was determined. He was spirited, and he was courageous. A lot of you don't realize, but Brian, it didn't matter where the fire was. Brian was gone. He didn't care whether it was in Inslee, Alabama, some of the worst neighborhoods in Birmingham, as his peers will attest. He'd get in his car, and for a long time, I have to admit, I did not realize he was driving from Odenville when I first came, and I thought, wow. It didn't matter what time of night, 2 o'clock in the morning, Brian would get up, and if it was a multi-family fire in Hoover, Brian was driving from Odenville to that fire to help his team. Brian was a Red Crosser. As I've told you, I can't express, one of the things I told my husband when I found out is that I don't think they realize, I said to my husband, they don't realize who they've taken. They don't realize how important he was to us and how he impacted our lives and the lives of our clients. Brian was inspiring, for inspiring. He was always encouraging someone on our Red Cross team. He loved to train, as you'll probably hear from some of his peers. He loved to train. He was approachable, as A in his name means. He never met a stranger. He treated all of our clients with dignity and respect. N is for nice. Brian was a nice person. I don't care how much, and all of us get frustrated, but if you said something bad about somebody, Brian's like, I'm not saying that, Debbie. I'm not going to talk about anybody. I said, okay. He would not say a mean word or anything about anybody. He was special. We all know that it takes a special person like Brian to continue to give of himself to others as he had lost so much in his life. Brian was a humanitarian. He could have volunteered for any other Red Cross line of service, blood services, service to the armed forces. But Brian really wanted to impact others, so he volunteered with disaster cycle service. And he used to tell me, he says, Deb, I really feel I can make a difference and impact the lives of others. He was amicable, as the A in his name means, a spirit of friendliness without serious disagreement or rancor. I don't ever remember Brian being upset with anybody. He was always kind to everyone, and he never got his ruffles up. And he'd tell me, boss, settle down. I'd get all riled up, and he'd say, Debbie, settle down now. Because, and the other thing is, he did not like mess. I'm going to tell you this. He would tell me, he says, I'm not going to get involved in that mess. He loved for everybody. He wanted everybody to get along. And then finally, the W in Shaw means Brian was warm-hearted. He always showed empathy, was sympathetic, and kind to his peers and our clients. Being kind is a Red Cross value. We are encouraged every day to be kind to others. Brian embodied all of these 5 C's that I've given you, and every letter in his name that I've actually given you. We also knew that we could depend on Brian morning, day, or night. And when I found out that Brian loved Blondie, as Carol and as Kay and Sally told me that was one of the groups that he loved in the 80s, Blondie, I took the lyrics from that song, and this is the way that I'm going to remember Brian. The lyrics from Call Me say, call me on the line. Call me any time. Call me, I'll arrive. You can call me any day or night. Call me. This is the Brian that I knew and that I loved. and it was an integral part of my team. I want to thank Kay, and I want to thank his wonderful sister, Carol, and of course, Sally, that I met early on, for all the kindness that you've shown us as a Red Cross family to bring us in as a part of your family, and I appreciate it. And at this time, I'm going to have David Goodwin, who actually knew Brian the longest. He knew Brian a long time ago, and I'm going to ask David to say a couple words. Then David will be followed by Gary and Mary Madeline. His peers wanted to say something, but they told me they get too choked up to do it because we could have lined this place up. But of course, I'm going to let David talk now. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon. Family, thanks so much for letting us be here and sharing this time with you so that we can pay tribute to our friend. And I thought that I was at the point where I would not get emotional today, but, that's how it goes, right? I've known Brian for almost 30 years. And, he's, as Debbie described, he's really respected by everyone at the Red Cross. I first came to know Brian when his sweet son, Artie, was in the YMCA camp where I worked earlier on in my career. If you didn't know Artie, you missed out. Artie was a great kid. He was incredibly bright. He always had the funny thing to say that was smarter than his age, right? He could get that other thing that, age he was with us, 7, 8, 9, 10, he was smarter than the 12 and 13-year-olds. He had the better joke that made more sense to everybody else. And he was so blessed to have a wonderful, loving father in Brian who loved him so much. So we'd get to the end of a hot day at camp, and Brian would show up to pick Artie up, and all the counselors were excited to see Brian because he had something good to say. He had encouragement for us, and that made such a difference. That was also not the case for all the parents. Debbie talked about Brian's role with the Red Cross, and it's really so fitting with everything that he faced and that you all have faced as a family. Brian was there to help people in their worst times, after a home fire, after they were dealing with tornado damage, or in some cases, hurricane damage. Brian was there to support people. The word humanitarian is defined as someone who is concerned with or seeking to promote human welfare. And that was clearly, easily, a word that we can all apply for Brian Shaw. He really cared for everyone around him. They might be his best friend, they might be a stranger, but he cared about those people. And I think that's what really brought him to give such a great service through the Red Cross. And I think we all try to make sense of this. To lose Brian this way. I really keep coming back to the choices that Brian made. The way that Brian responded to loss. The ways that Brian responded to heartbreak. He poured himself into caring for others. When I think many of us would have loaded up the trailer and been on the road forever, Brian kept coming back to pour himself into other people. I think that's It's that role as a humanitarian. He really set an example for all of us. I want to assure you that we're going to continue to honor Brian. We're going to continue to serve others in his honor for many, many years to come. Thank you. Thanks for letting us be part of this today. Thanks very much.
I don't know that I could say a whole lot more about the wonderful things that Brian brought to all of us. Mary and I were fortunate enough to get to work with him closely this last year in the Fultondale tornadoes, the other tornadoes that came through our counties, the flooding, and I think in one of the events we were doing what's called damage assessment. It was just he was out running close to where we were, and we were out in another area down in the southern part of Birmingham area, and I think must have talked to him maybe 8 or 10 times, getting guidance from him because he was so knowledgeable and so sweet. He's one of the first people I've ever seen that always answers his phone when you call him, always. And I was sitting there as I was listening to different things about Brian. I was thinking of something my father had told me. He says, you know, if you live and have 5 true friends in your life, you've really accomplished something. In the short time that I knew Brian, and Mary did too, I think that he definitely was on the top of the list of the 5. He was just an amazing person. It's like a fountain of good. I've never met anybody that was so filled with kindness and gentle, and miss him dearly. I know you all do too. Thank you.
I told Debbie that I wasn't going to say anything today because I knew it was going to be hard. But I just decided I would because I love Brian. We instantly became friends. The first day that I met him, when he came to Birmingham to take his first class for the Red Cross, like everybody else has said, he was like a brother to him. But he and I were buddies, big buddies. Brian and I were very close. We pretty much talked daily, except when he was out of town and on his great adventures, as he called them. You could always count on Brian for whatever you needed. Brian always helped me. He and I tried, he would call me and he would say, Kim, I need you to look up this, do this. And I'd say, wait, Brian, I got to grab my pen. And he'd say, Kim, you're old school. And I would say, well, Brian, I'm pen and paper. He'd say, that's old school, Kim. You need to do it this way. And I'd say, Brian, cotton pig, dadgummit. And he'd say, where do you get those words from? I'd say, and then he'd say, oh, I forget, your country. I'd say, no, that's right. So we would pick at each other about that all the time. So, but that Tuesday, Brian and I called Brian, and he and I talked, not for very long, but we did talk, and we was talking about Red Cross stuff, obviously,
And before we hung up, I said, "Take care of yourself. I love you, buddy." And he said, "Okay, I will. I love you too." But I'm so blessed to have been able to have that short conversation with him. And that's something that I'll always have in my heart. And they can't nobody take that away from me. And I'm thankful for that. And I just want his family to know that he was always such a great and wonderful friend, buddy that I love so very much. So thank you.
Kim, let me give you a hug. I called her and she's like, I can't do it. And a lot of them, if does anybody else have anything they'd like to say? Is there anybody that would like to say? Sure.
My name's Donnie Chanel. My wife Sally's here with me. We were unfortunate enough to only know Brian for a few years, 8, maybe 10 years. But we were supremely fortunate in knowing him for those years. I wore this shirt today because it's the shirt I had on the first time I ever met Brian. It's from Abe's Canteen in Arroyo Seco, New Mexico. My wife and I fell in love with New Mexico many years ago, and we go there all the time. And we've met Brian many times with the excellent barbecue and Mexican joints that are around Odinville now, and we always talk about New Mexico. I'm going long-winded. I wanted to start this morning. We were sitting out on the deck, we usually do on Sunday, and listening to music. And I heard a song. And there was a verse in the song. It was about a bar, a restaurant. And these 2 little girls came in and asked the waitress, "How much does that candy cost?" And the waitress said, "How much got?" And the girl said, "Between us, we only have a penny." And she said, "Well, those are 2 for a penny." She was laughing. That just reminded me of Brian. The name of the song is "Here Comes That Rainbow Again." And that was Brian. It's by Chris Christopherson, one of the greatest songwriters ever lived. And it fit that verse, "They're 2 for a penny, and here comes that rainbow." Thank you.
Very special. Now I want to introduce some adventurers with Brian. This is Lauren Bell and Karen Worley. They met Brian in the Tampa area, and they did a lot of fun things, and Brian loved these folks dearly so.
I just wanted to start by saying how Brian came into our lives. My mom and dad have lived on Harborview in Tampa for 50 years or more. The neighbors 2 doors down had lived there longer than that. The Maxine Bunton was also Maxine Cochran, and it turns out was Mary's aunt. So Brian had come to visit Maxine, and I had gone down there to do something. I can't remember why. This was about 6 years ago. And I came back. I ended up talking to Brian, and as y'all know, I mean, it's instant camaraderie, instant joy with this man. And I came back, and I told Lauren, I said, "You got to go down and talk to this guy." Well, Lauren can talk to a wall. And I knew when he met Brian that it would be hours. 2 hours later, we finally got him to come back in with Brian.
I get in trouble a lot talking.
But anyway, that's how Brian came into our lives, and the 3 of us talked about getting together for our next river trip. So then Lauren included him, and that was the first river trip. We do extreme. We go out, we camp in the woods, go down the Swanee for 7 days. We do all kinds of stuff. And Brian, my understanding, he had never done anything like that. So, and then one other thing, and then I'm going to let him tell you about the river trips. This is a silly little thing that Brian and I had a connection for, and it was the B scary movies, like Godzilla, Wolfman, Dracula. Well, when I found out he loved Spinguli, and y'all know who that is? Okay. Well, I got him a T-shirt. It might be in his closet in there, Spinguli T-shirt, but he would call me on Halloween, "Are you watching scary movies?" I'm like, "Yeah, are you?" So we just had that connection, and we talk about, Godzilla and Mothra and Ghidorah and Gamora and all those. Anyway, it was just really cool to have that silly connection between the two of us. And lastly, we had a Halloween party at Weewahitchka, and Brian wouldn't tell us what he was going to be. And he walked out, and can you see Brian? He came out in a brown monk's outfit with a rope. And I mean, he pulled it off to the T. It was perfect. And we had a really good time with that. I'm going to let Lauren tell you some more.
Well, I guess I wanted to start out. I got a text from Brian. It was probably about 2 years ago. And I'm looking out here in the crowd, and I'm trying to figure out who it was, because it was a picture of two, 60-year-old people possibly, and they were both in their birthday suits, and they were running off of a dock and jumping in the water holding hands. And I'm just trying to figure out who that is.
They're not going to admit it.
Yeah, so if you are the ones, please come forward. It was just a great picture. He was always a comedian. We loved him for that. But he was like a magnet when I first met him, and it was like, wow, this guy is just incredible. I mean, we just bonded so quickly. I mean, within a matter of weeks, we were like calling each other all the time and talking about stuff. And he was just that kind of person. And he was such a great person and a gentle person. And I've heard a lot of wonderful things today that people have said about him. And, oh, man, he was just, he was that kind of person. Everything you guys have said is just incredible. I mean, and your stories. But, we decided to go on a river trip together. And it was 4 of my buddies. And we go on these river trips. Well, we went on the Swanee River, and it was about 58-mile trip together. So I really got to know Brian very well on that trip. And every day he would take a shower in the morning, and we would have breakfast, and he would start talking about my buddy Don, because my buddy Don was kind of an extremist as far as traveling. And Don brought like 10 coolers. And so typically it would take us half the day to break down camp, and he'd just like, "Oh my God, man, why did you bring all these coolers?" And, but every day was a laugh with him. I mean, he was always telling great jokes and experiences in his life and stuff. And we just, every day we laughed and laughed and laughed on our trips. But by 10 o'clock, I would have Brian soaking wet in the front, because he would ride in the front of our canoe. And I would try my hardest not to get him wet, but it was just impossible because, he had a little weight up there in the front of the boat. And so, every wave we'd hit, splash, Brian, we'd be like, "Golly, I'm just going to quit taking showers. It's just not worth it," And as we got close to the end of our river trip, we met this lady in Swanee-town, and she came down on her golf cart, and she was very talkative like me. And we started talking, and Brian chimed in on it, and he was talking with her, and very interesting lady, and we were hitting it off pretty well. And Brian had told her a little bit about himself and stuff. And, well, she was like, "Well, I have a friend of mine, and her husband just passed away, but she's a beautiful lady and you just love her, you know? And he's like, okay, well, I'm game for that. And so Brian came back to Tampa with us after the river trip. And he says, I'm headed back to Swanee-town. And so he went up to Swanee-town and took 10 ladies out to lunch in Swanee-town. I'm like, what a ladies' man this guy is. I'm like, he's got no problem getting women. I'm telling you, you know. But yeah, that was just a lot of fun on that trip. And we did a couple more river trips together. He was always so happy when he would come to our house in Swanee, or not in Swanee, but Tampa too, but Weewa. And he would stay with us a lot of times for the week. And we had a room. I'm sure a couple of you have Brian's room in your house. Yeah, you know, and so we had Brian's room, you know, and he'd come and stay with us. And, you know, he would help us a lot around the house and fixing things. And I learned so much from him. I mean, he taught me so many ways of, I know how to do cabinets now, so I can do kitchen cabinets. And, you know, we did electrical together. And he was an excellent teacher. And I see that with the Red Cross. He loved training and stuff too. So, I mean, wow, what a guy. And I remember one time we worked on this fish cleaning table for like 2 days. And Brian says, well, he says, I'm going to stay here an extra day before I head home. And we're like, sure, go ahead, you know, just lock up. And so we headed home and got home later that evening back in Tampa. And I got a text from Brian. He's like, man, I got some bad news for you. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, about that time, the pictures started coming through on the text. And we had all gone through Hurricane Michael about 2 years ago. Hurricane Michael hit the area up there. And so there was still quite a few trees that had weak limbs in it. And so, one of the big limbs in our oak tree that we put the fish cleaning table under, it fell right down and smack in the middle of the fish cleaning table. And, no harm. We really laughed a lot about it, you know, and it just so crazy that it happened, you know. Well, recently the power company guys came out and put a new telephone pole in right there, and they hit that fish cleaning table again. So, but yeah, and I called Brian a lot. You know, I'm sure we all have our down days and stuff, and you just call Brian, and he'd cheer you up. He'd just make you feel good inside, you know. And I can always remember when I'd call him, and he'd say, hey, Lauren, how you doing? You know, I mean, just with so much life and energy, and that was Brian, man. It was just so infectious to hear his voice. And, it did a lot for both of us. You know, I'm truly so glad he came into our lives. We didn't know him as long as some of you people did, but in the 5 years that we've known him, I mean, he grew on us so heavily. I mean, we just couldn't wait to see him or talk to him. And I skipped over something I missed. I kind of gave him a nickname, and it was very catchy, and he also enjoyed it. He loved his nickname. He grew on him, and he loved it. And I would call him Papa Smurf. You know, like, how you doing, Papa Smurf? It's Lauren. And he would always laugh about it. But yes, I'm just going to have to read this last part because it's kind of my closing. But I would always joke with Brian. Karen and I were ready to hit the road. Well, this part I can just say. We often would joke with Brian that we wanted an address book of all of his friends because it seemed like he had gone all over the country and he had met so many wonderful people. And it just made you feel good about this country that there's that many wonderful people out there, you know. And And I was like, Brian, I said, I would love one day to follow in your footsteps and track down some of his friends and meet them again and spend time with them because they just sounded so incredible.
Friends that are hosting us
Today.
here, Jennifer.
Oh, man. Yeah.
We wouldn't have met them
If it wasn't for Brian, yeah.
We met through Brian, and then our friends that went on the river trips with us, he instantly loved Brian. Big shocker, right? But yeah, he'd go to Sarasota and visit Don and call Dwayne,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So,
He was always coming down. He would stop at several places on the way down to Tampa and visit.
our friends, which are now his here.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So as my closing, I would like to say, we'll all greatly miss our friend Brian. He was truly a beautiful person, and I am honored to say he was my friend, and I think he was an angel from heaven walking on this earth, and he touched the lives of so many of us. I know he's happy now that he's in heaven, with Abby and Mary and Artie. And I thank you, Brian, for being our friend. And we love you. We love you so dearly. And we'll miss you forever. But we will never forget Brian either. I mean, I know I've heard that from a couple of you. You're always going to think about Brian, and we're always going to try to be like Brian. This world would be a better place with more and more people like Brian. So thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who would like to? Hey, Candy. Anyone else who would like to make a comment? Candy, come on. It's Candy Daugherty. She is the sister of Abby, Artie's mom, and Brian's wife.
Okay. Hey, everybody. If I get through this without losing it, it's nothing but a miracle. I just want to say, first of all, I have a shirt on that Brian liked, and I purchased it a couple of years ago. He always liked it. It says, "Take it easy." And every time I would see him or talk to him, before we would finish our visit or conversation, he'd always say, "I love you, girl. Take care," or "Take it easy." And so, y'all can't have this shirt. It's very special. I am Abby's sister and Brian's sister-in-law and Artie's Aunt Candy and godmother. I met Brian when I was about 12. That was just a few years ago. And my father was so delighted with Brian. I have 3 fabulous brothers that are incredible in their own ways, but Brian knew how to fix and do everything. And if he didn't know how, he would figure it out. And my father was like, yes. Anytime he needed help with something, Brian always could come and help. And it was just kind of a joke around the family how Daddy really needed that 4th son. He needed Brian to help him out. We were really close, and Abby used to play but act like she was jealous that he and I were a little too close sometimes. And I have a picture of him hugging me and Abby with her back turned like that. We just all were like best friends, and he meant a lot to me. I loved Art. I loved y'all's daddy. He was very precious, and I spent many evenings just sitting around talking about old school things and listening to him, and he'd smoke his pipe, and I just loved it. Remember how that pipe smelled. And he loved his pipe. And that was real special. He was very special to our family. My sister's birthday was on December the 12th, and my father went over there that night after they'd had dinner and everything and visited with them and had a really good visit and everything. And I'm so glad because my father was suddenly killed the next day in a car accident. So I'm so glad that Brian and Art and Abby got to have that special time with my dad because they loved him and he loved them. Brian and Abby had kind of decided they probably weren't going to have children, just a personal decision that they made, and God had other plans, and so Abby was almost 5 months pregnant before she knew she was pregnant. She thought she'd just been eating too many Snickers or whatever, and as it turned out, she came to the house and she told Mother and I, and we were just thrilled, literally jumping up and down, hugging each other. And Brian was a little concerned, and he said, if it's a boy, can we name him Art? He said, of course. He said, okay. He was fine after that. And it was the boy, and that was Artie. You've never seen a prouder dad than the day that Artie was born in the hospital. Brian was just glowing. He was so excited. So God knows what he's doing. After Artie's surgery and everything and chemo and all he went through, his hair was starting to fall out. And I have a son that played baseball, and I had clippers. I used to cut all their hair in the summer, line them up, cut their hair for baseball. And he said, will you go ahead and cut Artie's hair? I said, sure. So I have a picture of Artie on my front porch in a townhouse in Pelham. And I accidentally nicked Artie and just messing with me. Artie made a big deal out of it. God, Candy, you hurt me. God, there's a little blood here. And Brian was like, God, Candy, I could have taken him to the barber. They were just kidding. They were just messing with me. I was devastated that I had done that. But they were in a Mustang. Brian had bought a convertible Mustang. Loved it. I don't know what year it was, but white with red interior. Loved it. And they went on a road trip to California and had a great time and such adventures. And I got calls along the way. That was a lot of fun. I'm glad Artie got to go on a road trip. And let's see. My son CJ loved his Uncle Brian, and he was like his apprentice for one summer. He was the hand me this, get me this, the gopher, I guess you say, for Brian, and he learned a lot and had such precious time with Brian. And then there was Mary, and CJ called her Aunt Mary. Just loved her. How could you not? And we got a little jacket for her, and I had embroidered on it, it's the South. We embroider things down here. And I put Aunt Candy on it, and why did I say that? That's me. I put Aunt Mary on it, and she loved it. She loved that so much. So she was very sentimental and sweet too, but we loved Aunt Mary. And the last thing I'll say is when Brian got his Camaro, he called me and he said, I got one too now. I said, what are you talking about? I had a Camaro years ago. He said, I got a Camaro now. He said, I'll take you for a ride, and I might let you drive it. We'll see. We'll go for a drive. And so all the phone calls and postcards, he liked to send those. And we stayed in touch. Didn't see him as often as I'd like to. I worked all the time, and he traveled a lot, and we didn't mesh up seeing each other, but we stayed in touch, and there's never been anybody finer. And I'm so glad that he was a part of my family, and that I could be a part of Carol, of y'all's family. And hearing y'all's stories has just been awesome, because I remember him telling me about all the little stories on the water and building this for somebody, and it's great to hear the stories again of Brian and how much fun and how much he loved everybody and doing things, always doing things for others. We were having a gender reveal, like it's my baby. My daughter-in-law is due to have my first grandbaby end of August. And they had a gender reveal April the 2nd, is that right? And Brian was supposed to come, but he had something to come up with his beloved Red Cross that he had to do. So anyway, but that was fine, but he was excited about the baby and being Uncle Brian and so he was a big part of all of our families, and we loved him. We'll always love him, and he'll always love all of us. And thank you for letting me speak.
Anyone else?
Uncle Brian was my great uncle. He was my grandmother's brother. I don't know how I got so lucky to have Uncle Brian in my life. When I first met Uncle Brian and Artie, I was like 5 or 6. So I was like, I guess 1, apparently, from the audience. I wouldn't remember that. Like, when I met Artie, he was insanely intelligent, talented. Like, he was good at music, and anybody who can figure that out is just amazing to me. And then I wasn't really sure what was happening when Artie passed, and my memories of that day were kind of fuzzy, but I remember that Uncle Brian, even when he was sad, he would try and make sure everybody else was okay, and then some time later, I assume this is due to all of his adventures. I got to meet Uncle Brian again, and he's helped us out from everything from repairing our lawnmower to to figuring out how to fix computers and stuff like laptops, and he's. And then when I was a truck driver, I came home, but didn't have transportation to go back to the Atlanta terminal. He gave me a ride, and before then I was, anytime Uncle Brian needed me to go pick up a car or something, or a truck, or anything like that, I would show up, mostly because of the free food. he would give me a little bit of spending money afterwards too, so that's nice. Yeah, it's just kind of wild, the people you meet in your life, and the people who really come through, and, when you need them, because he's saved my job, saved us from the housing authorities. He was teaching me a whole lot about how to be a good person, that you just need to know things so that way you can help other people. If you don't know it, learn it, and then do it, and that's something that's impacted me, and man was a genius, and just, really, he was a good man. Anyways. Yep. I don't know how to end a speech. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. You nailed it. Anyone else? Okay. We all learned something new about Brian today, but we didn't need to learn anything we knew. We just loved him. Just loved him, and are all enriched by that. I want to just say one other little thing about Unity and the support Unity was during Artie's illness and Mary's illness. And I failed to mention earlier that downstairs from coming in the front, there's the youth center. And in 2001, it was named Artie's Place. And Brian did a lot of work on renovating Artie's Place then, and then most recently, a few years back, it was renovated again, and Brian again came and helped with the renovation. So for so many reasons, Unity's just a really special place for us. Joan, if you would come and pray us out, and then Jim, you're going to sing for us. You're going to sing us out, right?
Well, I just want to say one thing. I have always been taught that whatever you see in another person, you could not see it if it weren't in you. So I feel so blessed to be in the presence of all of you, hearing all the things you saw in Brian. So thank you for that. Let us pray. Sweet Spirit, that whole and complete Spirit where nothing is missing, we thank you so much for gifting us with the soul, Brian. We feel so blessed. And we just imagine him now at this moment being welcomed by all of his friends who have gone before, or Abby, Artie, Mary, his parents, and saying, "Welcome home, our good and faithful servant. Well done." Thank you, God. Amen.
Can you see a theme running through today? I mean, how blessed we all are. I understand this is one of Brian's favorite songs. It's a Bob Marley tune. I wish I could play reggae well, but I just have to do it Jim style. Don't worry about a thing. You can sing with me. 'Cause every little thing gonna be alright. Singing don't worry, singing don't worry about a thing. 'Cause every little thing gonna be alright. Rise up this morning, smile with the rising sun. 3 little birds pitched by my doorstep, singing sweet songs of melodies pure and true. Singing, this is my message to you. Ooh, ooh. Come on, sing with me. Sing, don't worry about a thing. 'Cause every little thing gonna be alright. Don't worry. Singing, don't worry about a thing. 'Cause every little thing gonna be alright. Here we go. Singing, don't worry about a thing. Every little thing gonna be alright. Sing it. Sing it, don't worry about a thing. Every little thing gonna be alright. Sing it, don't worry about a thing. 'Cause every little thing gonna be alright. Yes.